livingheritagehomeschool.com.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Jacob Glass, and welcome back to another episode of the Millennial Medic here on Eschatology Matters, part of the Fight Laugh Feast Network. Have you ever wondered how you could possibly homeschool all your children at the same time? Have you ever felt a tension between discipleship and academics? Ever longed for a beautiful, uncomplicated, theologically sound curriculum that will not bow to the spirit of the age? Look no further than Living Heritage Homeschool. Living Heritage offers a family-style K-12 curriculum centered on beautiful, well-written books that spark the imagination and reach the heart. Your children will be grounded in the Church Fathers, Puritans, apologetics, classic hymns, literature, and art, creation science, biblical Greek, and more. Living Heritage helps students go deeper through expert video and audio instruction. And everything is built on a daily homeschool family worship and trustworthy Reformed theology to prepare your children to live for Christ in all the world. All in an open and go format. So you can find the curriculum you've been longing for when you visit livingheritage.info, and you can get 10% off your first curriculum plan when you use the promo code Eschatology at checkout. Again, that's code Eschatology at livingheritage.info. All right, so hopefully you guys can see the slideshow. So just like Daniel chapter 5, Daniel chapter 6 has kind of sent me down a rabbit hole. In the meantime, me and my wife actually had another beautiful little daughter, so I've also kind of been delayed with getting this out as well. So without further ado, let's get into Daniel chapter 6. Okay. Verses 1 through 5. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began to distinguish himself among the commissioners and the satraps, because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. Then the commissioners and the satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to the government affairs, but they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Then these men said, "We will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God." All right, so we start off with Darius, the Medes. So if you guys haven't seen the videos I did on Daniel chapter 5, specifically the video with Dr. Stephen D. Anderson, where we kind of detail who was this Darius the Mede. So a little bit of a spoiler here. I think he's Cyaxares II. So I'm going to kind of assume that moving forward. Like I said in the previous video, if you have seen chapter 1, I think I falsely identified him as Gabrias. And I clear all that up through my Daniel chapter 5 video. So if you have not seen that, please go back and watch it. So Darius sets up 120 satraps and 3 commissioners. It said Daniel was one. And he was actually going to be placed over all of the commissioners and the satraps. So Daniel was a faithful servant unto Darius, just like he was unto Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar. And the commissioners and the satraps that were trying to trap him couldn't find anything where Daniel had messed up, where negligence was shown, or where he was being unfaithful to Darius or mishandling his money or whatever he had put him in charge of. And instead of still pursuing that or still trying to come up with false accusations in regards to the government, they said, we can go after him in regards to the law of God. So where in Daniel's piety and worship can it come head to head with our Median and Persian law? So it continues, then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows. King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is, the injunction. Okay, so clearly all the satraps, commissioners come and conspire against Daniel. And Darius was dealing... So the big thing, I think, that why this worked. So you have the idea that they came and it said, all of us have decided together that you should do this, king. So number one, I think they falsely presented it to Darius that everybody was in agreement. Clearly, Daniel was not in agreement with this. He was left out. So it was them lying to Darius to kind of present this. Yeah, everybody agrees, when that wasn't the case. But the other thing that kind of probably made it appealing to Darius is that Darius, being Cyaxares II, who was king of the Medes, is now ruling over the Babylonians specifically. That's who we're dealing with here. So he is now ruler over a new people. And what better way could he kind of gain respect and control than to put in something like this, an injunction that would show the allegiance of the people to the new king. So I think it was definitely something that seemed appealing to him to kind of establish himself as the new ruler of the Babylonians. The last thing you see here is that, and you'll see it moving forward, is that they petitioned this idea that the law of the Medes and the Persians cannot be revoked. And I think you can kind of see this further in the book of Esther when you deal with the decree of Cyrus the Great. So when they go back to Jerusalem eventually, they start to rebuild the temple. People conspire against them, just similar here in Daniel. They conspire against those rebuilding the temple, and they go to the king saying, these guys just want to rise up in power and throw off your rule. So what Darius and Artaxerxes end up doing is they look back and they find Cyrus's decree. At that point, they allow the rebuilding of the temple. And I think a lot of it is probably because this whole idea that if a decree or an injunction is put in place, it cannot be revoked. And it actually worked in the favor of those rebuilding the temple when they went back and realized, oh, well, Cyrus's decree to rebuild the temple can't be revoked. So we have to let them build. Continuing on, now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, he had windows open towards Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, and as he had been doing previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den? The king replied, the statement is true, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Then they answered and spoke before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction that you signed, but he keeps making his petition 3 times a day. So this is actually where I found most of my study was this idea of Daniel and his petition and how he kind of partook in this. So first of all, we started off with the fact that Daniel knew that the injunction was signed, and he still chose to keep his custom and pray 3 times a day. Not only did he pray 3 times a day, he wasn't hiding it. He, on his roof chamber, opened up his windows towards Jerusalem, and he continued to kneel and pray. So this discussion is really hard, I think, in terms of piety versus survival of the people of God, because we see Daniel doing something that for sure is dangerous, is going to put his life at risk. But the problem becomes is, do we then take this as a principle as to how all Christians should act in these moments? But the problem is you start to see things like Rahab, the idea that instead of telling the truth to the men who were looking for the spies, she chose to lie in order that they would survive and be able to carry out their mission. You can look at churches who potentially hide underground when an injunction comes in that they cannot meet in the public square. They do an underground church. So it's really complicated to say, there are moments when God has desired that people like Daniel, instead of hiding and praying, right? He didn't go into his room and close the curtains and hide and keep it secret and say, you know what? This injunction's only for 30 days, so I'll just hide for 30 days, and then once the 30 days are up, I'll continue opening my window. No, Daniel chose to continue his custom and pray exactly how he had been doing. So, do we, as Christians, do that when the government tells us to not do something that would involve piety? Or do we take the move and say, it's only 30 days, we can hide out for now, continue our worship services, and once the 30 days are up, we can, go out and about? That's really hard, and I really cannot tell you that I have an answer there, because I do find that in Scripture we see examples of both. Like I said, you see Daniel act one way, and God intended that Daniel would act that way, and he was blessed for acting that way, and God used it to show the power and the sovereignty of God over kings and their corrupt injunctions that they put in. But then you also see Rahab, and Rahab is praised for doing what she did in hiding the spies and not choosing to choose her piety in the sense of telling the truth over hiding the spies. And you could also, again, like I said, make the case of, was it the right thing for the early church to not be out and drawing attention to themselves, but they kind of kept underground in order that the church would survive and the gospel would go forth? I'm going to say that's going to be praying for prudence in the moment. I don't know that I have an answer for that, and I'm sorry that I can't help you guys there. And maybe you guys have a better answer to that, and put it in the comments, and maybe you can help me on that. But the things that I really dug into here were really small things on the surface you wouldn't probably think of, but they were things that I wanted to learn more about. So, number one, why was Daniel opening his windows towards Jerusalem, and why was he praying 3 times a day? On the surface, if you're not familiar with this, you're like, man, that kind of sounds kind of Islamic, right? The fact that they would pray at certain times, face towards Mecca and things like that, it seemed very similar. So I'm like, well, where does this come from? Is there any biblical grounds, or is it just what Daniel chose to do because that's what he wanted to do? So the idea of towards Jerusalem actually comes from Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the temple in 1 Kings 8:44 through 50. It's also echoed in 2 Chronicles 6:34 through 42. So let's go ahead and look at Kings. So this is what it says. This is Solomon speaking. When your people go out to battle against their enemy by whatever way you shall send them, and they pray to the Lord toward the city which you have chosen and the house which I have built for your name, then hear in heaven their prayer and their supplication, and maintain their cause. When they sin against you, for there is no man who does not sin, and you are angry with them and deliver them to an enemy, so that they take them away captive to the land of the enemy, far off or near. If they take thought in the land where they have been taken captive, and repent, and make supplication to you in the land of those who have taken them captive, saying, we have sinned and we have committed iniquity, we have acted wickedly. If they return to you with all their heart and all their soul in the land of their enemies who have taken them captive, and pray to you toward their land which you have given to their fathers, the city which you have chosen, and the house which I have built for your name, then hear their prayer and their supplication in heaven, your dwelling place, and maintain their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you, and all their transgressions which they have transgressed against you, and make them objects of compassion before you, before those who have taken them captive, that they may have compassion on them. For they are your people and your inheritance, which you have brought forth from Egypt, from the midst of the iron furnace, that your eyes may be open to their supplication of your servant, and to the supplication of your people Israel, to listen to them whenever they call to you. For you have separated them from all the peoples of the earth as your inheritance, as you spoke through Moses your servant when you brought our fathers forth from Egypt, O Lord God. And when Solomon had finished praying this entire prayer and supplication to the Lord, he arose from before the altar of the Lord, from kneeling on his knees with his hands spread toward heaven. So I believe that this is exactly what Daniel was doing. So Daniel was taken, if you remember from chapter 1, he's taken from Jerusalem as a young man of a noble family from the tribe of Judah. Daniel was most likely familiar, obviously, with the scriptures, familiar with the temple liturgy, and familiar with this prayer of Solomon. So Solomon says it exactly what is going on here in Babylon. When they sin, when they're carried off as captives to a far off land, if they were to turn and look towards Jerusalem, look towards the temple, and they would pray and they would repent, Lord, remember them and forgive them and heal them. All of these things is exactly what I believe Daniel was doing his 3 times a day, is that he's making supplication before the Lord in remembrance of Solomon's prayer that he made. So I thought that was pretty neat. All right, so in regards to the 3 times a day, I probably actually spent most of my time focusing on this 3 times a day passage. It really led me to understand the daily temple liturgy, the times of sacrifices, the times of prayer, and you can see it in a lot of places, right? You see it in the original laying down of the temple liturgy, even back to the tabernacle. In Exodus 29, you see it echoed in prayer, talking about prayer roughly around the same times in Psalm 55. You also see it in Psalm 102. And it led me to read this book. It was called Jesus and the Mystery of the Tamid Sacrifice by a gentleman named Michael E. Hunt. He is Catholic, so you got to watch out for all the mass references. But if you can get through the mass references, the book was actually really, really good in terms of detailing what happened during the daily temple liturgy, specifically the Tamid sacrifice. So the Tamid sacrifice was one continual burnt offering sacrifices that was really the heart of all temple worship, because it was daily. This burnt offering was to be maintained throughout all the day and all the night. They were never allowed to let the fire go out on this altar. So what they would do is they would, in the morning, they would be woken up, what was called the cockcrow, which was roughly 3 a.m., and that's when the priests would wake up. They would start firing the ovens and things like that to prepare, because not only did you have, obviously, the sacrificial lambs, but you had bread offerings and wine offerings, so they would actually make the wafers and things there at the temple. So they would start their day roughly at 3 a.m., and then at 6 a.m., they would lead. So it's the beginning of the Jewish day. So the Jewish day was 12 hours from 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. or 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So you would have this beginning at 3 a.m. They would start their morning, and at 6 a.m. what they would do is they would lead out what was called the first Tamid lamb. They would lead him to the altar at 6 a.m. They would look at him, make sure he was unblemished. He would deem him as innocent. And then at the 3rd hour, which was 9 a.m., they would sacrifice this first lamb. And then at the 6th hour, which was noon or 12 p.m., they would bring the second lamb out. And then at the 9th hour, which was 3 p.m., they would sacrifice the second lamb. So this was the normal daily temple liturgy in terms of the Tamid sacrifice specifically. So what was interesting is that you find that, let's go to Psalm 55. Psalm 55, it says, "As for me, I shall call upon the name of the Lord, and he will save me. Evening, morning, and at noon I will complain and murmur, and he will hear my voice." So you see prayers also at evening and morning and noon. So, for example, morning would be the 3rd hour, 9 a.m., the 6th hour would be noon, and 9th hour, which is 3 p.m., is what they started considering evening. So 3 p.m. was evening for them. So you see it marking up with these same hours that were significant in the Tamid sacrifice. So right now, we have Daniel praying 3 times a day. It doesn't tell us exactly what hours. You have a call in the Psalms to pray morning, evening, at noon. And then you have these sacrifices that were going on at these times. So let's look at Exodus 29, the very first handing down of this Tamid sacrifice liturgy. So it says, "Now this is what you shall offer on the altar. 2 one-year-old lambs each day continuously. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight," which essentially just means evening. "And there shall be 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with 1/4 of a hin of beaten oil, and 1/4 of a hin of wine for a drink offering with one lamb. The other lamb you shall offer at twilight, and you shall offer with it the same grain offering and the same drink offering as in the morning, for a soothing aroma and an offering by fire to the Lord. It shall be a continual burnt offering throughout your generations at the doorway of the tent of meeting before the Lord, where I will meet with you to speak to you there." So this was the beginning, right? And it set up this temple liturgy that continued on all the way throughout, obviously, the destruction of the Second Temple. It is, again, something that I think that what Daniel's doing is that he's organizing his prayers towards Jerusalem, like we said, in reference to the prayer of Solomon, but he's also continuing in the temple liturgy that he would have been familiar with. Daniel grew up in Jerusalem. He was a part of the noble and royal family, part of Judah, so he was familiar with this whole worship service. And his prayers were lining up exactly with the times of temple worship and temple sacrifices. I put in a quote from the Michael E. Hunt book, Jesus and the Mystery of the Tamid Sacrifice. And he says, "The morning Tamid was led out to the altar at dawn and offered for a sacrifice at the 3rd hour, which was 9 a.m., at which time trumpets were blown, signaling the beginning of the morning liturgical services." So he goes to write that at this point, right at the sacrifice of the first lamb and the trumpets being blown, that's actually when they would open the gates to the temple and let everybody in to begin their liturgical services. So you would have the priests, whether it was having worship, prayer, in between the 2 sacrifices, actually between the 9 a.m. sacrifice and the 3 p.m. sacrifice is actually when you could bring your sin offerings, your guilt offerings, all of those things were to be done between the 2 Tamid lamb sacrifices. He goes on to say the second lamb was brought to the altar at noon and sacrificed when the afternoon worship service began about the 9th hour, which is 3 p.m. And they also say that it usually kind of wrapped up around the 11th hour, which was 5 p.m. So if you can see this chart over here, what I'm about to show you, which was the greatest connection that I think I made out of this chapter, which was not the point of Daniel for me, or the point of the story really, but it was really eye-opening for me. I guess I didn't realize how much Jesus fulfilled the Tamid sacrifice and the whole daily temple liturgy. So this chart actually is showing Jesus' crucifixion over against the daily Tamid sacrifice. So let's go back real quick. So in Mark, you see Jesus' crucifixion lining up exactly with these same hours. So you see Jesus, when he tells Peter, he says, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. So I've always thought that, because some translations will translate that before the rooster crows, I always thought that that meant there was a real rooster and that a real rooster crowed, and Peter recognized that. What I didn't realize, just like we said, the Jews had 12 hours a day, they actually had 12 hours of night that were broken into segments called the night watches. Jesus actually mentions this other places in Mark, where he says, whether it is evening or midnight or when the rooster crows, I can't think of the 4th one, but he mentions all 4 of these watches. So the third one, which marked 3 a.m., which was the beginning of morning, was called the cockcrow. So they would blow a trumpet between the start of one and, the end of one and the start of the next. So what Jesus actually seems to have said to Peter is that before this trumpet blast signaling what we call the cockcrow in the beginning of dawn in morning, you're going to deny me 3 times. So in Jesus' crucifixion, we have that going on. The beginning of the cockcrow, while he's just been hounded by the priests. Then he's brought before Pilate with what John says is, according to Roman time, the 6th hour. So that would have been 6 a.m. So at 6 a.m., Jesus was brought before Pilate, which is exactly the same time that the first lamb was brought before the priests. And both Pilate and the priest deem the lamb innocent, right? So Pilate says that Jesus was innocent. He didn't want to condemn him. And then you have in Mark, let's go there. Mark 15 says, "It was the 3rd hour when they crucified him. The inscription of the charges against him read, 'The King of the Jews.' They crucified 2 robbers with him, one on his right and one on his left. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, 'And he was numbered with the transgressors.' Those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads and saying, 'Ha, you who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross.' In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes, were mocking him among themselves, saying, 'He saved others. He cannot save himself. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, now come down from the cross so that we may see and believe.' Those who were crucified with him were also insulting him." And it says, "When the 6th hour came, darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, I'm not even going to try to say it. I think it's Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which translated, my God, why have you forsaken me?' When some of the bystanders heard it, they began saying, 'Behold, he is calling for Elijah.' Some ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave him to drink, saying, 'Let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down.' And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last, and the veil of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. When the centurion, who was standing right in front of him, saw the way he had breathed his last, he said, 'Truly this man was the Son of God.'" So what Mark says is that Jesus is put on the cross at the 3rd hour. That's exactly when the first lamb sacrificed. At the 6th hour, he says that darkness fell over the land. That would be the noon hour when the second lamb is let out. And then at the 9th hour, Mark says that Jesus died. And that's exactly when the second lamb was sacrificed. So Jesus' crucifixion day, from the start of the cockcrow to his 9th hour death, is a perfect playing out of the Tamid sacrifice. It is completely fulfilled. So it's pretty amazing that you have all of these sacrifices from the beginning of the laying out at the tabernacle to the carry off in exile when they can't make sacrifices. Daniel's keeping the prayer at the same time, and then Jesus is sacrificed all at the same time. It's this one giant temple liturgy playing out throughout all of time. It's beautiful. It's amazing. And I thought that was like the most amazing thing when I'm reading through Daniel, something that people might think is so small and insignificant. You know, oh, Daniel's praying 3 times a day, but he's praying during the same times that the temple sacrifices were to be done. And Jesus dies at the same time as the temple sacrifices and worship were to be done. It's amazing. I also threw in Peter and Cornelius. Even after, obviously, the sacrifice and Christ's death, they were still keeping prayer roughly at those same times. So let's go to Acts 3 and Acts 10. So Acts 3, verse 1 says, "Now Peter and John were going up to the temple at the 9th hour, the hour of prayer." Okay, so we have Peter and John still continuing in that liturgical way. You see it in Acts 10:3, about the 9th hour of the day, he clearly saw a vision of an angel of God who had just come in and said to him, "Cornelius." And then we see in 10:9, on the next day, as they were on their way approaching the city, Peter went up on the housetop about the 6th hour to pray. So we have prayer at the 9th hour and prayer at the 6th hour. So it still continued on even after Christ's sacrifice, which I thought was pretty cool. And the last thing I wanted to throw in here for this, just kind of showing how serious the Jewish people valued the Tamid sacrifice in the temple liturgy. I actually looked at the deuterocanonical time. So this is when Pompey was coming against Jerusalem. So it says, this is by Josephus, "Now when Pompey had pitched his camp at Jericho, where the palm tree grows, and the balsam, which is an ointment of all the most precious, which upon any incision made in the wood with sharp stone, distills out thence like a juice. He marched in the morning to Jerusalem. Hereupon Aristobulus repented of what he was doing, and came to Pompey, and promised to give him money, and receive him into Jerusalem, and desire that he would leave off the war, and do what he pleased peaceably. So Pompey, upon his entreaty, forgave him, and sent Gabinius and soldiers with him to receive money in the city. Yet was no part of this performed. But Gabinius came back, being both excluded out of the city and receiving none of the money that he was promised, because Aristobulus' soldiers would not permit the agreements to be executed. At this, Pompey was very angry, and Aristobulus was put into prison, and came himself to the city, which was strong on every side, excepting the north, which was not so well fortified. For there was a broad and deep ditch that encompassed the city, and included within it the temple, which was itself encompassed about with a very strong stone wall. It says, and anyone may hence learn, so this, I kind of jumped ahead, and anyone may hence learn how very great piety was exercised toward God in the observance of his laws, since the priests were not at all hindered from their sacred ministrations by their fear during this siege, but did still twice a day, in the morning and about the 9th hour, offered their sacrifices on the altar, nor did they omit those sacrifices, if any melancholy accident happened by the stones that were thrown among them. For although the city was taken on the 3rd month, on the day of the fast, upon the 179th Olympiad, when Caius Antonius and Marcus Tullius Cicero were consuls, and the enemy then fell upon them and cut the throats of those that were in the temple. Yet could not those that offered the sacrifice be compelled to run away, neither by the fear that they were in of their own lives, nor by the number that were already slain, as thinking it better to suffer whatever came upon them at their very altars than to omit anything that their law required of them. And that this is not a mere brag or any encomium to manifest a degree of our piety that was false, but is the real truth. I appeal to those that have written of the acts of Pompey, and among them Strabo and Nicholas, and besides these two, Titus Livius, the writer of the Roman history, who bears witness to this thing. So there's a few things here. Josephus talks about the morning and evening sacrifice, even talks about the 9th hour. But what he's saying is that the Jews took the Tamid sacrifice so seriously that when Pompey took the city, they didn't stop doing their temple duties and the sacrifices. They thought it was better that they continued to do it and give their lives than to simply just run away. So the idea of this Tamid sacrifice and how much it permeated the culture was huge. Right? I mean, it was the essence of their worship. So again, when we go back to Daniel, I want to keep bringing this back. Daniel knew this. Not this story right here, but Daniel knew the seriousness and the piety of keeping this Tamid sacrifice. So it makes sense as to why he was so pious to, again, not only open his windows towards Jerusalem, but he would make sure that he's praying and keeping in the daily temple worship around the same times that they would have been doing in Jerusalem if they were still there. So I thought that was really amazing to see all of these connections in this giant liturgy throughout all the time in the church. So let's continue in Daniel. Sorry that took so long. I hope that you guys found it as interesting as I did. So it says, then as soon as the king heard the statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, "Recognize, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or statute with the king, which the king establishes may be changed." Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you." And a stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. And the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. So we obviously have Darius seeking to save Daniel, but he can't. So really what Darius ends up doing is entrusting Daniel to his God. This is, I think, something clearly that was known about Daniel through not only Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, but I'm assuming Darius must have known this. We saw earlier that he appointed Daniel as one of the three commissioners and was about to put him over the whole kingdom because of all the extraordinary things that he had done. So he was already doing them for Darius. He probably put him there in the first place because when he took over, he probably heard of what Daniel had done amongst Belshazzar and done amongst Nebuchadnezzar. So he's beckoning that and hoping that Daniel's God will deliver him again. So I think this is, again, very similar to Pilate and Darius. There's kind of a connection here between Daniel and Christ being brought before the king or the proconsul, right? And being innocent and having really no ability to kind of do anything other than condemn him, even though they were very reluctant to, right? Pilate didn't want to condemn Christ. He knew Christ was innocent, but he did it because he was keeping peace amongst the people, and the Jews were requiring it according to their law. And the same with Darius and Daniel, right? Darius didn't want to punish Daniel. He was trapped. He was fooled. He was angry, but he couldn't do anything else. So ultimately, obviously, Daniel's thrown into the den, and a stone is rolled over the opening. So again, there's a connection, I think, to Christ here in the imagery. Obviously, I don't know that you should go too far in these connections, but I do think that there is blatant imagery in Daniel. Just like the Pilate and Darius, you have both of them being thrown into a hole in the ground, essentially, and a stone being rolled over it. It seems that their fate was final, that Christ was dead, and that Daniel was as good as dead. A stone is rolled over, it's sealed, it won't be moved. Instead of being sealed in Christ's tomb case, you had guards sealing the entrance, right? But as we see, both are delivered. It says not only was Daniel's sentence sealed by Darius, but it was confirmed by all the nobles. So it wasn't just Darius who did it, but every single noble marked it as well, right? They are guilty for this this atrocity. Darius is so distraught that he's brought to fasting. So I don't know how common fasting was in a lot of other cultures and whatnot. I'm sure it played a part in ritualistic observance and whatnot. But he's also a king, right? Like he's a king that has all of these things. It says he put off all entertainment, put off all these things that you would have thought could make a person happy, but none of this glorious kingdom that Darius had was enough to ease his mind. And all he could do was, sit and wait until he could get to the cave, is what we see. So it says, then the king arose at dawn at the break of day and went in haste to the lion's den. When he had come near to the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel spoke to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth. They have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him. And also towards you, O king, I have committed no crime." Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they cast them, their children, and their wives into the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. So, like we were just talking about, Darius is not able to sleep. He's fasting. First moment he gets, he rushes to the cave, and he's in hope that God had delivered Daniel. And what I thought was really interesting is that Daniel doesn't resent Darius. So when he calls out to him, the first thing Daniel says is, "O king, live forever." He shows him honor. I don't know if he knew that Darius was innocent in the matter, or it was just that, just as us Christians, right? Even though we are under tyrannical governments, or governments that we don't agree with, there's never, I think, a case to not give honor where honor is due. Now, does that mean we can't stand up against things that are wrong? Absolutely not. Of course, we should stand up against things that are wrong. But you don't just give dishonor for no reason. I don't think you should make the decision to do anything that wouldn't honor God in the situation, right? God has called us to recognize that he has put these rulers over us. Even if we don't like them, it is by God's hand and God's hand alone that they are there. So we are to show honor to them as king, but it does not mean that we can't petition the king. It doesn't mean that we can't disobey in the sense of when rules are contrary to the law of God, just as Daniel did, right? Daniel disobeyed the injunction because it would have been disobeying God, right? But Daniel also accepted his punishment, and Daniel also gave the king honor that was due to him. So I think it's a good example of how a Christian should act in these situations, that we shouldn't add sin on our part to the situation. Just because the king is sinning does not give us a license to go on and sin. So I thought that was really interesting. He also says that his God had sent his angel and shut the mouth of lions. So there's always going to be kind of, I guess maybe a debate whether this was an angel in the sense of an angelic being, or if this was Christ or a Christophany. This idea that was Christ himself in there, as just the same conversation of was Christ in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That is something that I'm not going to take a firm stance on. I don't know that I have an opinion in the sense of I don't know that it changes the idea of the passage, because whether it was, I put angel, oh my goodness, angel, sorry for the typo there. Whether it was an angel or whether it was Christ himself, the fact is that it was God who was there with him. Either God through his angel or God through Christ was there with him. And it says it shut the mouth of the lions. And I thought this was interesting because Psalm 22, when talking about Christ, right, 22 is a huge messianic psalm. And one of the things it says is, "Save me from the lion's mouth and from the horns of the wild oxen, you answer me." So this is, again, imagery. Just as Daniel was saved from the lion's mouth, Christ is saved from the lion's mouth. So it is so similar so amazing how much similarities there are between the story of Daniel and the story of Christ. He goes to say, "I was found innocent before him, and also towards you, O king, I have committed no crime." So Daniel is saying the reason he was delivered is because he was innocent. That he trusted God for his safety and for his deliverance, and God had deemed him innocent. And that's why he is now out of this den. So he wasn't only innocent before God, but he also did nothing wrong towards the king. And that's why at the beginning of the chapter, you see that no negligence could be found, right? Daniel was a wonderful servant to the king. He wanted nothing but the best for the king. And again, if you want to see similarities between Daniel and Christ, it's another one. Why was Christ out of the tomb, right? Because God had found him innocent and accepted his sacrifice. That death could not hold him. And it's a very similar imagery found here in Daniel. Then you have the false accusers being punished. So Darius goes to take not only the man and the men, but their families, their wives and their children. And this is, I think, a really good point to make in terms of the federal headship idea. You also see it in the Old Testament, also with Achan. I think I'm saying that correct. The idea that not only was he punished, but the families were as well. Now, we can make the case, right? Is that right or is that wrong? I don't think that's the point of this right now, but the big point is that God demands that the false accusers are punished in the very way that they accused those who were innocent. We can see that in Deuteronomy. So it says in Deuteronomy 19, verses 18 through 21, the judges shall investigate thoroughly, and if the witness is a false witness, and he has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him just as he intended to do to his brother. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. The rest will hear and be afraid, and will never again do such an evil thing among you. Thus you shall not show pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot. So that's exactly what Darius actually did to those who had falsely accused Daniel. So I do think it was a God-honoring thing to punish them for their wickedness. And then you have the statement that the wicked's bones were crushed. Again, when you look at similarities, is that Daniel's bones were not crushed, just as Christ's bones were not crushed. But in the same sense as the false accusers and the wicked's bones will be crushed, that's the same with the wicked at the end of all things, is that Christ's bones weren't crushed, but the wicked's bones will eventually be crushed as well. So again, that carryover in the imagery between Daniel and Christ is amazing. So continuing on, then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in the land, may your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and enduring forever. And his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So this really makes you question, was Darius saved, right? We already kind of went through that discussion with Nebuchadnezzar, and I would really take the position that I think Nebuchadnezzar was saved. Given the way in which he spoke of God after he was humbled, it does seem that he was praising the God of heaven himself. Darius's definitely could be the same way. But it's not as clear, I think, as Nebuchadnezzar. He does recognize God's sovereignty over all things. He recognizes the fact that the kingdom is an everlasting kingdom and his dominion will never end, and that he actually makes a decree that everybody in his domain, in his dominion, must fear and tremble before God. Now, some could debate, right? Some could debate that doesn't mean he's requiring that they worship him alone, right? Maybe that's just in addition to kind of how the Greeks were with all of their gods. Maybe it's the same way with the Medes. Maybe they're saying, in addition to all your Median gods, right, you also have to serve the God of Daniel. And that definitely could be true. But what is amazing about it, nonetheless, whether he was actually saved or not, is he says something so unbelievably true, right? And that has been spoke about from the beginning of the book of Daniel, in Daniel 2, talking about the kingdom that would come and destroy all the other kingdoms, including the Median kingdom, which Darius is a part of. It talks about that God's going to set up his kingdom that will last forever, and that its dominion will have no end. And he is just echoing that, because the whole theme of the book of the Daniel is constantly pushed forth almost in every single chapter is that the kingdoms of this earth and the kings of this earth are put there by God. And ultimately, the only one who truly has sovereignty is God himself. In that he actually, in his kingdom, is the only kingdom that is going to endure forever. All the other kingdoms are just clay in his hand. He can move them in whatever direction he wants because God is in control and he has set his king on Zion, which is Christ, right? So the last thing that I wanted to touch on here, again, diving into the Darius identity, is that for those of you out there, I guess, that would say that Darius is just another name for Cyrus, is that it doesn't really fit with this last verse of Daniel because they are mentioned as distinctly different characters. So let's go back again. So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So they are distinguishing them, as two separate characters. So with all that being said, let me get over here real quick. Daniel chapter 6, right? So Daniel chapter 6 is honestly pretty straightforward. I don't think that there is a lot of things that we had to deal with in terms of prophecy. There wasn't really anything that takes a lot of time to figure out. There's not really much debate over Daniel chapter 6, but there was a lot of little nuggets there, a lot of little things that I didn't see with years of reading that and years of knowing that story. I never would have thought in a million years to look at the idea of why was Daniel praying 3 times a day? Why was he opening his window towards Jerusalem? So seeing those scriptures, seeing how Solomon had prayed that when they were in exile, if they were to look back, may God forgive them. That's exactly what Daniel's doing. To see that the 3 times a day were in reference to points in the temple liturgy revolving the Tamid sacrifice, and that Daniel would have known that by being a young man growing up in that culture, and he's just keeping his normal daily prayer during those times. The fact that Christ was sacrificed during those times and tried during those same times, that Peter and John and Cornelius were praying during those same times. It's amazing, right? I think that imagery is awesome to see in little passages like this. We also see, obviously, the conversation of how should we Christians act in the face of persecution, in the face of difficult situations, and how we can potentially use prudence to make a decision, right? Should we continue to openly worship in this way, or is this a moment where we hold back in hopes that the gospel will go forth in the church? And again, like I said earlier, I can't give you a straightforward answer on that because I think biblically we have examples of both. And then also the amazing thing in Daniel 6 is it is filled with imageries of Christ, right? It's filled with an innocent man being condemned, thrown to the lions, delivered by his God, the wicked being destroyed, so on, right? Like there's so much imagery in Daniel 6 that it's a really beautiful passage, not just a kid's story of, oh, Daniel and this lion, look how cute these lions are. He was in there petting them and playing games with them. Like, obviously, that's not the point. Daniel should have perished, right, being thrown in there, but God delivered him. And it is a story of the sovereignty of God above all things, the sovereignty of God over kings, over wicked men who conspire against the righteous. So that's it. So we can be looking forward to Daniel chapter 7. So this is going to be a huge one. So a little teaser here in about a week and a half or so. I am going to be interviewing Jay Rogers. So he has written a few commentaries on the book of Daniel. So if you have not read those, go get them. They are amazing. He also has some on Audible if you're a person who likes to listen to those. So I'm going to interview him over Daniel chapter 7. I'm also going to probably have my own Daniel chapter 7 video, so that's what the future holds. Please be patient with me because Daniel chapter 7 is littered with hard prophecy. So I want to take my time on it. I want to try to exposit it the best and most careful way possible, and just give you guys the best video I can. Other things I would like to say is go and get yourself a formerly Patriarch cigar. They're still under that title. Soon to be Steadfast cigars. So go ahead and go get you one. They are an amazing company. Go check them out. Love you guys. So that's it. Hope to see you guys soon. God bless.
Seated here at my right hand, the Lord to my Lord did command, for of these heathen I will make a kingly footstool for your sake. The Lord